This episode is about resolving conflict and understanding that we don't all see conflict the same way. It's an important and really critical skill to develop as you elevate in your career, and you're likely going to come across a few what we call difficult or intense personalities. So being able to lean into those, to adapt well to how different people deal with opposition and with conflict is essential if you want to be effective with a wide range of people. Here are the two questions this podcast answers. One, how do you successfully transition into your first official leadership role? And two, how do you keep climbing that leadership ladder and continuously get promoted, although the competition and the expectations get bigger? This show, the Manager Track podcast, will provide the answers. I'm your host, Ramona. I'm on a mission to create workplaces where work is seen as a source of contribution, connection, and personal fulfillment. And this transition starts with developing a new generation of leaders who know how to lead so everyone wins and grows. In the show, you'll learn how to think, communicate, and act as a confident and competent leader you know you can be. Welcome to this episode. We're diving into something every manager faces, but very few truly master, and that is workplace conflict resolution. So whether you're dealing with team members who can't see eye to eye, or you're directly involved in a tense situation with a colleague, how you handle conflict can make or break your effectiveness as a leader. And I'm saying all that as a person who is not naturally inclined to have conflict. To me, in fact, this was a really difficult skill to learn, and to be honest, I'm still learning this. I haven't mastered it. I constantly find myself trying to find reasons why not to engage in conflict. But it is this discipline that I'm trying to develop because of the tools that I have that help me to lean into it. And then it really just takes the courage to create the space and time. And with that, with every interaction that I lean into the opposition or into the conflict, I hope it is making me stronger and more effective over time. While for some of us this comes more natural, others really have to do the work. Wherever you are on that spectrum, what I'm going to share with you today is really important because we don't all see conflict the same way. And if you don't understand what to look out for in other people and how to observe if they're in conflict, even if you aren't, and how to then best react to that, you're going to miss a huge chunk of information that would allow you to be more effective in your relationships. So I want to start off with a story that perfectly illustrates how easily conflict can sneak into our workplace. A few years ago, I was working with a tech company where two department heads, let's call them Alex and Jamie, we're making up the departments as well as the names for confidentiality reasons, but they were constantly at odds. So marketing and product rarely agreed on timelines, priorities, or even basic communication protocols. In one particularly tense meeting, Alex from marketing interrupted Jamie from product and said, "Once again, your team is changing requirements after we've already started the campaign." Jamie shot back, "If your team would actually attend our planning sessions instead of asking for last-minute accommodations, this wouldn't happen." And the tension just vibrated through the room. Both of them talented leaders, but the ripple effect of their disagreements made it really hard on the team. It was this ongoing friction that was starting to cause problems. So what's interesting but not surprising is that both Alex and Jamie were convinced that they were both right. They both felt their department was being disrespected, that they had to advocate on behalf of their team members, and both of them were contributing to a cycle of conflict that was completely unnecessary and could have been resolved by better understanding what actually was going on. But these scenarios where this friction happens are very common, and the ripple effect that then it has on the team members, the overall work environment, how individual members of the different teams now start to see each other, that is pretty significant. And if you add all that up, it can get quite costly. Hence, this is why understanding conflict, being able to take yourself out of a conflict situation, to look at it with a bit of distance and then being able to resolve it effectively is such an important skill to develop. So what causes workplace conflict in the first place? At its core, conflict tends to happen when someone deprives us of something that we value, a norm, a rule, or a desire. It could even be like, I deserve respect. I deserve to be heard, valued, given credit, participate, be involved. It's decency. And when we feel other people don't give us that, now a value is being compromised. So think about it. How often has conflict started because someone didn't respond to an email fast enough? Or because a colleague didn't include another person in a meeting that they felt they should have been invited to? You can probably see this. It may not be a big blow up kind of conflict, but these little moments of like, I can't believe it, and the eye rolls and the frustrations. Or maybe because someone took credit for work that, let's say, you contributed to, and you hear it and it's just hate it, right? So these moments of stress and conflict happen a lot. Now, in each case, there's this deprivation. Again, respect, maybe inclusion, recognition, all of that is part of it. Now, the second major source of conflict comes from what we at Arkova call blueprints. Those are our expectations of how we think things should be, like a blueprint of reality. But when the reality differs from our mental model, our mental blueprints, and we're attached to those blueprints, then conflict arises. When I want someone else to do something or show up a certain way, or for my boss to do the kind of things that I expect of a leader, and then they don't do it, now I might be in conflict. My boss actually may not even know that's what is happening. Here's the key insight to this. It's rarely the facts that create the conflict, but our interpretations of circumstances and whether we like them or not. So let me give you an example. 2 employees received the same feedback from their manager. Manager says, this report needs more data to support the recommendations. The first employee thinks, great, my manager's helping me make my work better. I'm just learning something right now. Thank you for the feedback. The second one thinks, oh my gosh, my manager doesn't trust my judgment and is micromanaging me, and they don't like the work that I do. I can't really ever satisfy them and be good enough. Same facts, exact same words spoken, different interpretations. And you may think, sure, but I'm sure there's a backstory to that. There were other instances that led to one person seeing it as a growth opportunity and the other person seeing it as a personal attack. Yeah, maybe. But there's also this personal interpretation involved. The one who sees it as a learning opportunity, they will just ignore the fact that it could have been personal. They will not consider that because it's irrelevant to them. The one who thinks it's personal will ignore all the facts and all the signals that the manager also wants to give feedback and wants to help them make their work product better. So there could have been a backstory, but the essence still is the same. Same message received, different interpretations. Now, before we go further, let's make an important distinction between conflict and opposition. This distinction is crucial for healthy teams. Conflict is that emotionally charged situation where we feel things are personal. My boss is micromanaging me, doesn't trust me, they never think I can do anything right. They don't believe I'm good enough. Personal, it's all me, it's personal. Opposition, on the other hand, is tension over tasks or projects. It's not about people involved. Hey, we missed the deadline. What's going on? This is frustrating. This is difficult for us to then achieve our milestones. What happened in this situation? Someone dropped the ball. We have to figure this out. Those are focused on the task. And these kind of conversations are not particularly bad. They often cultivate accountability. They bring visibility to problems. And when it's even opposing opinions, hey, we should do A. No, I disagree. We need to do B. A is not considering all these other aspects. I strongly believe B is the right approach. The other person says, no, I don't see it that way. A is the right approach. That is opposition. Those situations are actually healthy. There's a lot of research around this of what makes high-performing teams be high-performing. What are the differentiators between mediocre teams and high-performing teams? Healthy opposition is one of them. The ability to engage in such dialogues, in such conversations, or even confrontations, while staying in this solution-oriented mindset and not letting it get to a personal conflict. So think about how some of the best ideas emerge when team members respectfully challenge each other's thinking. Like when a junior engineer questions a senior architect's design choice and ends up identifying a critical flaw that saves the project. So as leaders, we don't want to eliminate all tension. We just want to ensure it stays in the realm of productive opposition rather than destructive conflict. And so it is on you to, almost as a leader for your team, set the guardrails and decide, when are we going from healthy opposition, what I want to cultivate in that space I want to create, but within the guardrails to ensure that this doesn't move over into conflict. And it sounds somewhat easy, but the challenge is that line between conflict and healthy opposition is blurred and isn't the same for everyone on your team. So understanding that we see conflict differently, we respond to it differently, means to really pay attention to what might be going on, to get to know your people, to understand what are their triggers, how do they show up or not show up when something isn't going well for them, when they're being frustrated. I've heard from numerous clients things such as, I got an email from my boss this morning, maybe at 8 o'clock, and I saw it and I literally wanted to go back to bed. I wanted to do nothing else all day. Or I was eating lunch, had a good day, and suddenly I get this email from a peer who sent something to my boss without first talking to me. And I flipped. Now, I was professional enough to understand I don't send an email back, but internally I was boiling. And so for the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't really focus on anything else. If you can resonate with this, if this is something that you've experienced before, then you also understand sort of the emotional cost of being in conflict and the productivity cost of then not being able to focus and actually get work done. So as a leader, you obviously want to learn that about yourself, but also pay attention to what's going on with your team members. What do they do when these situations happen? And how do I realize it and can intervene when I crosses that line from being healthy opposition to conflict? Now, one tool to address this when you're in a situation where you're realizing something just triggered me, but you're not directly talking to another person. They're over there doing their thing, you're over here boiling. One tool to help you personally get out of this sort of conflict situation is a model that I call self-inflicted tension, and it's based on a framework by the Arbinger Institute. It helps us understand how we often perpetuate conflict without actually realizing it. And hence why at Arcova we call this self-inflicted tension. So picture a 4-box diagram. In the first box is the hey, they do, the actions others take. They send emails without involving me or without including me. That's what they do. In the second box, it's how do you interpret those actions? I feel undermined. I feel like they're stepping on my toes. I feel disrespected. I don't feel valued. So those are the things that tell us how you interpret someone else's actions. Now, in the third box, or the next question for you to ask is, what do I do? How do you respond based on your interpretation? I send a snappy email back. I cut them out of communication that I send out. I disengage them. I withhold information. What is it that you do as a response to that? And then the fourth question is, when you do those things, what do they see? So other people also interpret your response just as you are interpreting their response. And it leads them back to box number 1, which is what they see. For them, it's how I see it. I see that they're withholding information, that they're not including me in emails, right? So we see how the two behaviors create a dynamic, almost like a dance. So let's walk through this with a real scenario. Let's call this client Tanya. Tanya had a new hire, Raj. What Tanya notices is that Raj missed the deadline for an important client deliverable. So they miss the deadline. "Ugh, I'm frustrated. We talked about it so many times. I can't believe that they missed it. It's going to be looking bad on me. I have to now take the blame and explain myself and fix it. They don't listen to me. They don't respect me. They're not paying attention. Or even, oh my gosh, or I made the wrong decision with hiring them." So this is the response to box 2, what they see. Tanya interprets this as Raj, again, being careless, not prioritizing her expectations. The list goes on. So Tanya may conclude he doesn't respect my authority or does not take this job seriously. So then what does Tanya do? This is box 3 or question 3. Tanya responds by implementing strict check-ins, asking for daily progress reports, reviewing emails that Raj wants to send to clients, checking in on all their deliverables on a regular basis, making sure every deadline is captured by Tanya and Tanya checks in on those so that this doesn't happen again. What does Raj see? Raj sees Tanya as a micromanager who doesn't trust his abilities. And he thinks, she's power tripping and not giving me any autonomy here. And then this leads us back to box 1, where Raj starts to work less efficiently because he feels demotivated by the micromanagement, which in turn confirms Tanya's belief that he needs close supervision and she might have made a mistake hiring him. So can you see how this cycle perpetuates itself? But the truth is much different. Raj missed the deadline because he was taking extra time to ensure the quality was high and there were no errors in it. And he misunderstood the priority level. He didn't understand how important that deadline was. He thought it's okay if I send it a bit late, but at least it'll be perfect. Now, Tanya was acting out of concern for the client's satisfaction, not because of distrust. Right? But Tanya wanted to really make sure that this doesn't happen again to this client, regardless of why the delay occurred. But their interpretations created a conflict cycle that was entirely self-inflicted. So this is something to pay attention to with what you own in conflict. You're part of the dance, so to speak. So this is a bit about conflict, how conflict shows up. But how do we actually break these cycles? So it starts by understanding our own conflict response styles. Research shows that people typically demonstrate one of 3 behaviors when things get tense. Some of us are assertive, so we lean into the challenge and we want to talk things out right away. And then once we've talked them out, we actually feel pretty good about things. Others are accommodators. They try to preserve harmony. Sometimes at our own expenses, we give up things just to make sure that conflict smooths over. We'd say, okay, we do it as you want. Yes, you're right. And then the third approach is de-analyzing, which means to slow things down and to try to understand all angles before proceeding. And so these are 3 different styles on how we may engage when some conflict occurs. And it's a lot easier to resolve conflict when people match each other's behaviors. So if you're dealing with someone who asserts themselves, but you're naturally someone who wants to analyze, you're like, okay, this is the problem. Let me go figure things out. Let me go think about it. Let me go look at the database, or let me go look at what really happened. And then once I know, then I can come back. You might need to temporarily shift your approach and match their directness initially before moving the conversation to a more analytical space. Now, like dancing again, you need to meet your partner where they are before you can lead them anywhere new on the dance floor. If you don't, and if you withdraw in order to figure things out, the person who wants to assert, they're going to feel like you leave them hanging and you don't actually care. Because what they need and what they demonstrate that they want to do is they want to talk it out and figure it out together. Not you go off, do it yourself. Similar with someone who's accommodating. They may not want you to accommodate. They want you to speak up and let them know how you see it in order to resolve it. That's their preferred approach. So think about what your preferred approach is when something happens that you don't like, when you sense stress or friction. And then also start paying attention how people around you navigate conflict. This is something that we discuss in more detail in the Leadership Accelerator, where we also take the SDI assessment that covers this framework and gives us indication of how we go through conflict with those 3 sequences in mind. It's a really powerful assessment for individuals to build awareness, but also for teams to better understand how they all operate during stressful times or when things don't go well, and how to engage effectively with each other in order to de-escalate. Now, another crucial concept is understanding that conflict typically progresses through different stages of escalation, right? There's not one way of having conflict. No, conflict escalates. So in the beginning, we might be a little bit annoyed. Then we start to get agitated, and then we might get angry. But initially, conflict starts to bubble up when we get a little annoyed, right? This is where it begins. And it's also where it's easiest to resolve it because we're not yet angry. But once that we further progress down that path, it becomes difficult because the more someone is emotional, the less they're willing to see the other side, the less they're able to actually distance themselves and look at the problem and stay problem focused. Because now, when emotions run high, intelligence runs low, emotions take over these things. To give you an example here, I saw this play out with a client in the healthcare sector. There were 2 nurse managers, let's call them Barbara and Denise, and they started with a simple disagreement over staff scheduling. Wasn't a big deal, but it was unaddressed and it kept happening. So it started to turn into frustrations, and it started to feel to one person that there was some favoritism involved. Now, I am not just a little annoyed, I'm agitated about the whole situation. But yet still, no one engaged in the dialogue, nothing happened. Each of them were thinking about it and ruminating on their own about what to do or what to say, but no actual conversation happened. The leader also, their manager, also didn't get involved, although heard about the issue, but thought, no, I'm going to let them figure it out. But this would have been one where the manager should have recognized, hey, they're not talking and it's getting worse. I need to intervene because the longer I wait, the harder it's going to be. So eventually this kept escalating and they were barely communicating except through formal emails with their directors and so forth, or where they were CCing each other. It was very polite, formal, but nothing else, not addressing the problem. But what's important is to recognize that even if to one person, let's say Denise, this wasn't a big deal, but the other person felt like, no, this is a problem. Even if you realize, hey, someone else is getting angry. I'm not, but someone else is getting angry. Then be the one who engages in the dialogue versus thinking that they'll have to come to you because obviously they're the ones with the problem. That is not leadership. Leadership would be to notice something is going sideways and to address it heads on. Be really direct about it with the intention to resolve it. Now, if they're really angry, they're likely not want to go hear your thoughts. The first thing to do in those cases is to really tune into their feelings. Make sure that they understand that you hear them, that you can see what's going on for them. And only later can you then actually share your perspective. Once that initial conversation is taking place, they've calmed down, you're reorienting the conversation around solutions, and then you can share more about your perspective. So as we're wrapping this up, I want to quickly recap. Opposition is useful, conflict, personal, not healthy, not useful. There's a good part of conflict and friction that's actually self-inflicted, where if you take on that leadership mindset and the idea and really owning the fact that we have a lot of self-leadership and that leadership of other people starts with self-leadership, use that self-inflicted tension framework to look at what do they do and how I interpret that, and then what do I do in response, and then how do they interpret my response, and how can I break that cycle so this is not turning into a vicious cycle that just makes it worse. What do I need to say? What do I need to do? How do I need to interpret their actions differently in order to turn that back around? And then when there is friction, you're observing others or even yourself, remember that we're not all responding to it the same way, that we have different approaches, accommodating, analyzing, or asserting. And that conflict usually escalates over time. And the sooner that we notice it, whether it's us or them, and get involved to resolve it, the better and the easier to do. Now, there are more frameworks around conflict resolution, which we all dive into in our programs at Arcova, including the Leadership Accelerator. Now, as always, I want to end this podcast episode not just with having shared information and maybe helped you see something or learn a tool you weren't aware of before, but also encourage you to self-reflect. What is your go-to approach when it comes to conflict or tension? Are you analyzing? Do you want to figure out what happened? Do you tend to accommodate, to reinstate harmony, or do you want to talk things out? And then second question, what do people around you tend to do? What is their response when something isn't going well? And how could you meet them better where they're at on the dance floor? To go back to that analogy. Okay, with that said, let's wrap it up. This was part 2 of this brief series around styles. We talked about communication styles in the previous episode. We'll link to it in the show notes. The two go together, communication styles and conflict styles. Is what we talked about today, and conflict resolution overall to help you better engage and communicate with people when things are going well, but also when it gets tough. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back with another episode of the Minute to Talk podcast next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed this episode, then check out 2 other awesome resources to help you become a leader people love to work with. This includes a free masterclass on how to successfully lead as a new manager. Check it out at arcova.org/masterclass. The second resource is my best-selling book, The Confident and Competent New Manager: How to Quickly Rise to Success in Your First Leadership Role. Check it out at arcova.org/books or head on over to Amazon and grab your copy there. You can find all those links in the show notes down below.